bother with the microphone here. I'm kind of welcome everyone. I know the soccer kids have got to leave for practice. So go ahead and, as you need to leave, go ahead and leave. But we want to get started because we want to have an opportunity for you to hear from these people a little bit. This is an event sponsored by the Graduate Women's Athletic Association, and I'm going to just briefly introduce the people here. I know many of you saw Mighty Max, the movie the other night, and these are all people who were active in athletics. Yeah, I know. And they're watching the slideshow. I should have the panel at the back of the room instead of in front of the room. I want to start Mary Jean Mulvaney. In the middle was the chair of the Department of Physical Education. From 1966 to 1990. During her tenure, she directed the growth of the women's athletic program from its early beginnings through the Mighty Mac era of competition in the AIAW, to membership of the NCAA and the Midwest Athletic Conference, to the founding of the UAA, one of the founding people involved in the foundation of the University Athletic Association. She was inducted into the Hall of Fame as a member of the inaugural class in 2003. We have 3 additional former athletes on the panel. Claire Orner on the end. Class of 1977. She was a 3-sport athlete, competing in volleyball, basketball, and softball. She returned to the university as an assistant athletic trainer and then became the head trainer, working at the university from 1980 to 1988. She was responsible for keeping our next 2 inductees healthy, and Claire was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2007 and works as a physical therapist in Denver. Ann Harvilla, class of 1979. Competed in volleyball and softball. She was a Gertrude Dudley Scholar and was awarded the Gertrude Dudley Medal as a senior. And has worked at the university since she graduated, and is currently the Dean of Students at Chicago Booth, and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2006.
We take exception to this description former athletes.
Okay, yeah, okay, they're always taking exception to former athletes. Janet Torrey Schultz, class of 81, in volleyball, basketball, and softball. She's coached basketball at Yale, worked in admissions at Denison University, and currently directs college access program for a nonprofit. Janet was inducted into the Hall of Fame last night. We're also joined by Diane Neskel, who was the basketball coach at Chicago from 1980 to 1984, and is currently ranked 2nd in all-time winning percentage among our coaching staff. Diane played her college ball at Indiana University, where as a senior, and I had to look this up on the website, as a senior, she led her team in total points, field goal and free throw percentage, assists, and steals. Diane went on to coach at Yale University from 1984 to 1990, and now works in secondary education. So I'm going to open with a couple of questions just to get them talking, and which is usually not a problem. This is especially fun for me because all of these people, I either worked with these people or coached these people, and they made it in the Hall of Fame anyway. So it was fun. The 70s were an incredible, dramatic change. The difference between 1970 and 1980 for women's sports, just absolutely cataclysmic kinds of changes in sports. Title IX was part of that. The women's movement was also part of that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that era and the changes you saw in sports during that period. So, Annie, do you want to go ahead and start?
A question in there? Or you
Yeah, talk about, high school sports to college sports.
Yeah, and we were talking about it last night, that for many of us, there would be boys' sports in the high school, but no girls, and that was exactly my situation. They had every sport you could possibly imagine for boys, and by the time I was a senior, I think they started girls' basketball. So if you wanted to play sports, you played in organized town leagues, or in my town, the Catholic League was when they finally started the city league, they had to split the Catholics up amongst all the teams because we would have killed them if we had all been together. But there absolutely just weren't even options. It's not like today where you just take it for a given. You had to getting in a play or doing music or whatever. It was kind of hard to be an athlete in those days if you were a girl.
Echo that. I graduated from West Lafayette Indiana High School, which most people think of Indiana as basketball and all that stuff. And we talked last night at my table, and I mentioned in my comments that we had to petition our high school for 3 straight years to have a women's basketball team. And finally, my senior year, we had one. And the ironic thing was that the man who was most against it, that was most resistant to it, was the men's basketball coach, Mr. Barbarian. And he had 4 really incredibly talented girls, daughters, that were athletes. But he was very frightened about sharing the gym and sharing his budget, and it was just so much change going on and so much pressure to have more athletic events and opportunities for women that he resisted for 3 years. And now he's a huge supporter of women's athletics, but it took him a while to realize it. But I agree with Annie, it was the biggest athletes in our high school at the time that I played were probably the cheerleaders. Were very athletic, but they were the most popular, but sports was just not something that was the normal path.
Sure. One of the things I was thinking about was that not only were women, we didn't have a lot of teams and that type of thing or support, but if you think now about sports and think about how surrounded you are by sports, especially if you play and you pay attention, but even if you don't, I mean, how many 24-hour sports stations are there on television? Women commentators, that was a thing that was unheard of. There were no careers for women in sports or athletics. It just was sports, and athletics were mostly for guys. I wasn't tuned into golf. We didn't really think it was a real sport at the time. Come around recognizing that that's a pretty difficult game. And there was a little bit of tennis, but probably not on television. So for us, does anybody remember Billie Jean King, Bobby Riggs situation? I don't know if you remember it or
The older people in the audience, the other old people.
So Guy mentioned that first time she saw a woman play sport on television. So growing up and thinking about careers, thinking about fitness training, nobody exercised just for the sake of exercise. We didn't have gyms, nobody went to yoga. I mean, it was just a completely different world. And then, so we finally, the Billie Jean King era really changed things because nobody thought, it didn't even matter if this guy was, I asked how old he was, in his 50s, and she's at the peak of her fitness. Nobody believed that she could beat him in a game of tennis. It was really unbelievable. And trust me, we were all holding our breath too because we didn't know. We'd never seen a guy play against a gal in the sport. So that really busted things open, I think. And the other thing I want to comment about is another thing that changes is I think that we were particularly privileged at this university. A lot of people went to other universities and colleges and didn't have opportunities to do that. And that's because of Mary Jean. I didn't even know that there was a scholarship the year I came. I didn't get a scholarship, but I heard about it after I arrived on campus. So I arrived at the admissions office to interview as a senior, just to kind of tour the campus and stuff with my parents, and they heard that I played some sports, and they're like, oh, you have to go meet Miss Mulvaney. So within moments, I was in Idenoise Hall, a facility that was just for women, and happened to have our gyms and locker rooms and a pool and all that kind of stuff. And then Miss Mulvaney, and didn't have So Miss Mulvaney was already making a lot of inroads for us here at this university that others didn't. And I don't know the details, but I know you're also one of the first women that had the men that is in the athletic department. You're the athletic director for men and women. So she was fighting for us from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll talk about the uniforms later.
Well, I really believe that there was no reason that women couldn't do as well as men. And when I came in '66, it was interesting because the lab school, the University Lab School, did have, it was sort of an intramural program, you might say. And they saw, we had a field hockey and a tennis team. And they saw the field hockey people out on the mall, and they thought, well, maybe we could, the high school wanted to play these college people because they had no experience. And they did compete against each other. And then finally, there were 2 girls, Diane Sherman and another.
Connie Gillen.
Yeah, thank you. Connie Gillen. And they wanted to have softball. So in '69, we just took anybody who wanted to come out and play softball, come along. And pretty soon, our friend from Concordia and a few of the schools in the area, they thought, well, we'll have softball. And so we really were a bit of a step ahead. But AIW, Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, developed, and that helped markedly because more and more people, schools became somewhat interested, and you had at least some competition. AIW existed for 11 years, and the end of that era was very bad because it was the NCAA fighting the AIW, and there were some schools that felt very strongly they should go with the NCAA, other schools felt. In fact, there were many lawsuits over this, and we, in fact, the interesting part is I went to the AIW last meeting that ever existed because I then flew down to St. Louis for the NCAA meeting. So that year was 81, 82, and we really began the merge years, and there was never another AIW tournament. The real purpose of AIW was to have state tournament championships and national championships. We finally got to the point where the women could at least compete on a higher level. In 81, with the elimination of the local, the state and the national AIW, they were extinct. And we then became, and finally, the reason, there were many women who still fought, and it was possible was the finances. Schools were willing, if they could make some money to help finance the athletic program for women, it would help. But the NCAA had so much money, there was no way to compete against them. And so then we slowly started, and it really was, it was a very difficult time. And those of us who finally felt more strongly about the NCAA than AIW were sort of outcasts. But we could see the handwriting on the wall. The women were never going to get even slightly on par with men if we didn't go ahead. So we did, and I think you see what you all do is just because we made this transition. It was difficult, but we went through it, and we got, and by goodness, you were going to championships.
Well, I was in that transition because we had won the AIW state championships in softball, and then transitioned into NCAA, and we started playing people like University of Illinois.
Yeah, we were playing
Northwestern, huge universities.
Yeah, it was, and we were way ahead for a small school playing these large schools, and we really didn't do better. You know? I mean, consider because women weren't in sports, and they didn't necessarily, and some of the schools were slow getting started, and we were ahead quite a bit. And so I think really the thing that probably meant the most to me in terms of your academics and your sports was the founding of the GWAA. That really put us on a level where we were competing against institutions that were comparable. They finally got Division I, II, and that didn't take too long. Just trying to struggle along, but we did very well. I think with the UA, it's just really wonderful, and you're very, very fortunate.
So Dan played Division I. So who did total points? We're today at Indiana in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to be in hindsight, growing up in an era that now people look at and say, "Wow, look at doing anything you just wanted to play." And so you didn't know that because
Or soccer, you had to go practice.
You were so bad.
They're annoyed at young fans here.
Thanks for coming.
But it was a great time to sort of grow up because I went to college in '74. Well, I graduated in mean, that was really all you did. And I was in Indiana at the time when there were no steps in 76. So I was there during that time, and we sort of, I think, viewed it as, well, this is going to be old. And, but I think the big thing when I see, I mean, I look across this panel and the connections folks have with the people that were here and the connections you're going to have, I think that was the most important. It's not about the basketball. And the reason I coach was not about the basketball. It was about the relationships and the opportunity to make lifelong connections. And I coached Janet Torrey, and that was a long time ago.
It was a long time. We're old, Diane.
Yeah, I know. But it makes me think about those connections that have happened forever for us. And she was with me out at Yale for 6 years, and we probably talk once a week, and that's been 20 years since we left Yale. And you don't get that anywhere else. And I think University of Chicago really understands connections and why sports are important. So I value that. Mary Jean was crazy enough to hire me when I was 2 years older than Janet as a head coach. And I don't know, Erin, you're not going to be able to do that anymore, but I think that's a lost art too. I talked about Ida Noyes. I remember one of my favorite stories about Pat Kirby, who was my direct boss here. And my first year I was working at Chicago, and Janet would come by and visit with me, and that was pretty fun because I was, a lot kind of closer in age to her than anybody else. I know he was coaching her. She'd say, "Oh, there's a pool table in the hall."
This was my work-study job at the time when I was supposed to be working.
Yeah, she's like, "There's a pool table in the hall." And I'm like, "Sure." And I thought I'd die about it. There's a pub in the basement. Okay, in my office, there's somebody supposed to be doing stuff, and she's like, "Let's go play pool." Okay, shooting some pool. Pretty soon, Pat walks down the hall and goes, "Hey, kid, I'm sure there's some work you ought to be doing." I'm like, "Yes, Coach Kirby, I'll get right on that." But those relationships are that informal relationship was really important.
That's why I decided to come here, actually, because the day that they hauled me in there to meet Miss Mulvaney, Rosie was there visiting. I'm still confused about whether you had 1 year under your belt at Smith or what, but do these guys know that you did your undergraduate work here in Russia?
Yeah, they've seen the badminton photo up there. So. And if people snigger every once in a while, it's because the badminton photo comes up here. Yes. So I graduated in '73, and the Gertrude Dudley Scholarship was announced in '72, and this was a full tuition scholarship. We had a STAG scholarship for men. This was a full tuition, 4-year scholarship based on your high school participation. You didn't have to play sports in college, but it was really based on athletics. And then there was and so in '72, the Gertrude Dudley Scholarship. And as this goes by, you'll see a Parade magazine cover that comes up. And that was one of our first Dudley scholars, Noel Berry, who's in the Hall of Fame. And we got national press.
We got.
The other Hall of Fame.
What did he have?
The other Hall of Fame winner was the other first Dudley scholar is also in the Hall of Fame, or Sylvia's. So this scholarship came about, and we got a lot of national press, and a lot of great athletes came into that first class of '77. And it really changed, it really changed kind of what was happening on campus. But Claire mentioned earlier talking about uniforms, so I think it's especially since you saw Mighty Max, it's probably worthwhile to talk a little bit about uniforms here. I've seen some of the photos of our really fine uniforms over the years.
The thing that was interesting about this parade, I was going to take that week off. It was spring parade. And my secretary called me and said, "I don't know what's going on." She said, "There's bags of mail." She said, "I think there's 2 great huge bags of mail." I said, "I'll be right in." So I went in the office. Everyone was asking about the scholarship. It was about that big in the parade article. And they just flooded in here. And like she said, that first class was, they came anyway. They didn't get the scholarship necessarily. But they came, and that's when we played Northwestern. And my word, we were so far ahead of them because there were these masses of wonderful athletes all together. In fact, I think the interesting point is we were the first institution to fly to a competition. They let us, it was a long process to get it done, but we went to MIT and played MIT, Harvard, and Brown. And when we were, I can so remember when we were ready to get on the plane to come back, we were all together, and behind, man said, "Is that the University of Chicago basketball team?" I looked at him, I said, "How did you know?" He said, "It's all over television." I live in New Hampshire, and I got it on the TV. And so it was just those little things that kept happening that made what we finally had.
The nuts and bolts of, which you guys might be able to relate to a little bit in terms of actually the practices and the games and stuff, was that, as you mentioned, a lot of people came to play even though they didn't get the scholarship. So we hear an orientation about tryouts, and I say something to the person next to me because she kind of looked like an athlete, and it turned out to be Laura Silvius, are you trying out for it? It was volleyball. And she's like, yeah, so we went there, a lot of people, and we went through whatever drills and things we went through. It was on a Monday, as I recall. And so Coach Kirby wrapped up the practice on Monday. She said, all right, you guys, we'll see you Wednesday, same time. And we're like, Wednesday? Well, what about tomorrow? Well, we practice 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for exactly 2 hours. That's it. We're like, can we come and play tomorrow? Can we come and practice tomorrow? And that right then and there, we started having practices 5 days a week. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Well, they really wanted to play. I mean, that was the difference. You had people who had not been able to play in high school, and they really wanted to. So,
And some really good athletes. There were some really good athletes.
oh, very famous.
Yeah.
Well, there was a case of a player who we went to a state tournament.
Actually, the driver of the other station wagon. He used to travel in 2 station wagons, and the freshman would be in the seat that faced backwards because if they got sick, it was okay. So yeah, we would travel in station wagons. So it was a station wagon.
Oh, we thought it was the greatest thing going. We were getting to go away to an event.
Yeah, and stop at McDonald's.
They fed you, yeah.
Yeah, they fed you. Yes. Nothing changes, right?
So we were in this tournament, and this one coach said, that girl, she has all the moves of an African American. I said, she was one of those. She was from South Carolina, and she was bused from her home area to another area, and she played basketball for him, and she had a African American coach, and she was because they really, I mean, he coached like he was coaching a men's team, and she was a wonderful player, wasn't she?
Oh, she was amazing.
I mean, she was just amazing. And so it was those kinds of things that happened that were, we shocked it every day, what was going to be the next thing. I remember coming from the north side after playing up at Bundle Line, solid ice on the outer drive, and I had more control over that van than I did over. I was skating down the hill. It was those experiences that you still remember.
As I recall, it didn't take ice. I wanted to be in the other car.
They never wanted to be with me. It was fresh. I got the freshman and didn't play with me.
More hazing.
Yeah, they don't want hazing. We don't have the same rules about hazing. One of the students had asked a question about fan support during our era, because it's always something we're always trying to encourage people to support our athletic teams. Can you talk a little bit about fan support? I mean, if you look at Illinois, where we played some of our games, it wasn't even spectator seating. They were much...
the gymnasium in Illinois is part of it. Now the theater was the gymnasium, you see.
So, but our group,
I think we had
our cheerleaders?
Oh, yeah. We got one of our former cheerleaders up there. I mean, the memory I have was the flying. I do remember that my freshman year was the year we flew to MIT and Brown. And again, person who literally fought for 3 years in high school to have a basketball team. 2 years later, I'm flying to a tournament in a plane with incredible athletes, the senior class that I was so blessed to come in and play with. And we're playing these other 3 teams. And then we ended up having, I thought, the whole season, wonderful fan support, so much better than our high school. A lot of the men's sports supported us quite a bit. A lot of the women's teams also supported us. And then the men's team put together a group of cheerleaders.
Well, in '76,
Which are not quite cheerleaders, right? If we would
They-
call them,
they
they
had
were
all-
cheerleaders,
they
right?
had a whole series of musical numbers. Row, row, row your boat was supposed to be George Washington going down the.
1976, this is the bicentennial year. So
Yeah,
there was
in
bicentennial
1976.
year.
There's long underwear,
Loose.
Long
shorts
underwear,
on,
stocking
funky
caps.
hats and rugby shirts, and they
Hilarious
obviously did not
skits.
look like regular cheerleaders.
We had a tournament here in '76. They were terrific. And all these fellas were staying in the lower level of my house, out in that direction. And they were just great. They really were. They were so good.
They followed us
And
everywhere. They
Tom was
did-
one of the, Janet's husband was one of the row your boat.
He was my best friend way before he was.
That's right.
We met as freshmen.
Well, the cool thing is they actually all piled in a car because they obviously could not fly out there with us. And they drove across the country to come to this tournament. They
They
landed
did.
at Brown to come to the tournament. There was a huge snowstorm and they ended up, I think, taking almost a day and a half with straight travel to get there. Clearly almost died on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. It wasn't great. But ended up making it, and I think we're a big hit with everybody at MIT and Brown.
Can't believe it.
Yeah, but it was,
I
I thought,
a lot
fancy.
of other people though. You get that support from other people. Their friends would come to see them. They just kind of like watching us.
Yeah, and I don't know if this happens now, but some of my faculty came to games. I was a German major, which is a very small department. They thought it was intriguing that I played sports. They didn't quite know what was going on. So I would say, well, come watch a game, and they would come. And do faculty and staff come watch you guys play, like some of your advisors and stuff, or is not so much? Because back then I really felt that they were
Well,
involved.
our first fans in Illinois were the Strauss family. And I don't know if they're still the legends that they always were, but Lorna Strauss was the dean of students. Her husband was in the pathology department, and she'd come with her kids who were little at the time, and she'd sit up in the balcony and knit, and so that was huge.
And
They
your daughter
had that
got
kind of support.
is in the Hall of Fame.
Now it's gone. So that was great, but in those first few games in Illinois, we didn't have the fans yet. You know, we had, I believe we lined up seats, so we had the benches, then we lined up some seats around, because I'm pretty sure Miss Mulvaney was from this table to me to the end line, and if anybody passed me the ball right away, get rid of it, pass the ball. Because, and I do hate to admit this, but my first 2 years in high school were still 6-player basketball. Does anybody know what that is?
What's those blank
And
stares?
this goes right back to the Mighty Max when she said, certainly you're not gonna make our women into athletes, or our girls, you know. How many of you saw the movie? That was a pretty funny moment. So Kathy Rush is explaining the difference between the women and the men's game, just a little bit to this nun. And she talks about working out or practices or something, and Mother Superior looks at her and she says, are you implying that our girls will become athletes? Because, you know, in most people's mind, it was fun and games.
It wasn't ladylike. I mean, you know.
Well, so it was a 6-player basketball game, so it was, the court was divided in half. And you were, 3 people were on defense and 3 people were on offense, and you couldn't cross the line because you didn't want to get tired running the entire length of the court. And there was a limited dribble. You could only dribble 3 times, and then you had to stop and pass it to someone else. And then eventually they developed a rover who could go the entire length. So it was
They were the real athletes.
Yeah.
They could play defense and offense. I mean,
But one of my memories from Anne is Anne comes in as a Dudley Scholar. Of course, we're all excited because the Dudley Scholars were all good athletes. She comes in to play volleyball, comes to the first practice, and she's like struggling with the rotation. And I'm like, this is not hard, this is clockwise. You know, this is not and she comes into my office and she said, well, Coach, she said, the problem is, she said, I played CYO, Catholic Youth Organization, volleyball, and there were 9 people on the side. 8 people on the side.
And you
And
said
she
to
said,
yourself first.
And I'm like, 8? What do you mean 8? So we sat there with 5 pennies and a nickel. The nickel was the center. So 5 pennies and a nickel on my desk, showing her how the rotation and the game worked with 6 players. And this is like one of our star incoming.
My Hall of Famer, just Hall of Famer.
I came a long way.
Struggled with
She came a long way. She came a long way in the process.
I would always say to you, Andy, remember, I'm the nickel. I'm the nickel. Get in your penny position.
Well, I go even back so much further than that. It used to be 9-court basketball every day. And then we went from 9, we went to 3. So they had to pass to this person in the middle and then go over to offense if we were on the defense. So then we went to 3, then we went to 2, then we started to finally have a roll player. And when basketball became basketball as we know it today, Coach Kirby went to all kinds of clinics to learn the full court game because he had played 2-court all her life. And so everybody was learning. And I remember she went to Bobby Knight, clinic that Bobby Knight had in Indiana. And the first thing he said, you're all here learning how to play basketball or coach basketball, but just wait till you lose your job because you're not successful. You don't even know what you're getting into.
Wow. That was pressure.
Yeah.
Well, I want to turn over to the students. Do you have some questions? They can tell stories forever.
About ancient times.
About ancient times, travel stories, the best food they ever ate.
So I actually have a question for someone in the audience.
Okay.
I'd love to know, because I think about how hard it was to balance the kind of intense academics here in sports, and that was always a challenge. And I so appreciate Chicago more in retrospect for the incredible education I got here. But I'm amazed that you guys are in this UAA and flying all over the place and having these sort of dual weekends, I guess, where you have these partner schools, if you do that. How do you balance sort of the sports and the academics? Is it difficult, or, I mean, is it a lot more? You don't know.
It's violent. I've reduced everyone to something.
I mean, are people able to actually study on the road? Because that was impossible. Right? We always brought our books, and they're like, nothing ever happened. I get the sense that you might be gone for 2 days at a time, or 3 days at a time.
Yeah, we're going to let the softball.
Okay, all right. That's why they're shaking their heads.
Well, because they don't compete in the UAA.
Ah,
So
okay.
yeah, that's why
Is there any UAA folks in here?
No.
So,
Helen was gone as for an entire week.
Wow.
Yeah, for NCAA at the end of the year. But the first week then, sports, you don't sleep.
yes. Yep.
That was pretty absolutely sleepy yet. And time managed extremely.
Okay.
I spent a couple hours on Saturday actually doing something entertaining other than work, unless I was at competitions. And those are a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
What was the other question?
Well, it's just how do you manage the travel, and if it's still in good balance?
I think so.
The sports
I feel
and the
like a lot of
academics.
people ask me, oh, like, why don't you want to go here on Saturday? But I'm like, oh, I gotta do my work so then I can go to practice. And they're like, why do you want to get up at 6 in the morning and go to practice? I'm like, this is fun. They have something to explain.
Making good choices.
We never had a 6 a.m. practice, that's good.
We did not. No, that would not harden our strengths.
Fortunately, these two women had a gymnasium that was separate from the men. You didn't have to share, and that helped a lot, I think, here.
When I was like, when what Claire said, that we often went to class in our uniforms because Coach Kirby would say to us, they don't have a locker room. Because you go to a school that had no accommodations at all for women, so you'd have to go dressed. So to Janet's point, you'd show up in class and people would look at you like, what's going on? That's with the Chicago thing. And then you'd go and then get on a bus because there would be no facilities for women on the other end. So we always went dressed. Most of our competitors just didn't have any place for you to go.
And some of those gyms look like the gym in the movie too.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Well, no, there were even places where we didn't even know there was a second gym because the women were playing in the women's gym. So like Wheaton College had 2 gyms, and I didn't know there were 2 gyms at Wheaton because we always played in the little gym when we played at Wheaton, and they had a big gym. That was where the men played, and the women played in the little gym. And some of it is just kind of, you know, I think it's hard sometimes for people to understand that difference, you know, because I think there was a level of gratitude that people had about competing during that time that didn't make you wonder about other things, so that in some of these pictures that come up, you'll see the same uniform. So we had 2 sets of uniforms. We had a white shirt with maroon shorts that was worn by volleyball, basketball, and softball. And then we had this silly little badminton dress that was worn by badminton and tennis. And then obviously the swimmers actually had swimming suits. But it was the same uniform, and we only had white shirts. Roderick was the company, and Roderick made white shirts, and that's all they made. So when you went to a basketball game, an away game, if the other team had the same white shirts that you had, someone actually had to put numbered pennies on. So this is varsity competition in the 70s. In the early 70s, you'd have to put an actual numbered penny on. And that was at a time that at this institution, the men's team, the basketball team had home and away uniforms and warm-ups. The baseball team had home and away baseball uniforms. And as a student, I didn't think there was anything wrong with that because I was so happy to have a uniform that it didn't even dawn on me to think this wasn't right, that the men were
those uniforms
yes.
were down to threads. We were wrapping down the thread. And Diane Truman, I'll never forget, tried to put a player out on a steal from first to second, and she threw the ball to second, and the flops ripped straight down the back. It was on thread. And Coach Kirby took some tape and taped it together so we could get through the game.
So that's when we graduated to polyester uniforms.
That's what
Which
we
is
find.
Those never definitely ripped.
not close to any,
Or moved.
well, they had to be heavy duty because they had to last.
Yeah.
Well, we started getting teams, sports-specific uniforms, I think our 3rd.
Yeah.
But, so they had to last, so they were pretty scratchy and pretty rough, but we thought we were
We
pretty.
did the laundry for the men, but not for the women. We all hauled our stuff home and did our own laundry.
Right.
There was no, and we didn't think, you didn't think anything.
And then the Civil War broke out.
Well, we got through it. Here you are today. Look at you.
Yeah.
How many warm-ups?
They look so good in their Chicago swag. I'm telling you.
They need some swag.
Yes.
I think we brought them a little swag here for you.
Uniforms and warm-ups and all these things you have. It must be wonderful.
No, I think it's okay. It's okay.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a final question here, and then if you guys have any other questions. But I want you to share with me your favorite travel story and/or eating stories. They're all different. Eating. Travel or eating story. What's your favorite? How about Annie?
Does anybody remember JoJo's?
Oh, yeah.
Dinner at JoJo's?
Goes right with the eating story. This is eating travel.
Particular story you're going to tell. JoJo's is the French dip, I believe.
I did the French dip night too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a theory that night. We were at the volleyball state tournament, I think, in Southern Illinois, and we went to this restaurant called JoJo's, and not having eaten all day because, of course, you didn't eat when you went, and there were no things like power bars and stuff. You just didn't eat. So I think by the time we got to dinner, we were dying and ate more than we can possibly make. Remember the onion rings were like this, and it was memorable because we all ate so much that we went back and sat in the hallway and then laughed all night. And that was where we came up with the theory that you could be food drunk. So all the blood in your body, when you ate that much, rushed to your head and made you crazy. And we talked about JoJo for years. Is that JoJo? You were JoJo.
Okay, I don't remember. I clearly was food drunk. Good. Well, it's a favorite travel story because it was our very first, and I've already talked with Diane about it, but it was her first year and our first year with her, and we had not had the greatest basketball experience for the 3 years prior to Diane coming, so we were all very eager to have this new coach. And she played at Indiana. We have not actually commented that Diane was also part of the first professional women's basketball league, which was started right after her graduation. So, like, you know, she was on a major pedestal, like, boy, this is going to be great. We go on our first road trip, which again, I think we had gone up to vans and not station wagons, but we had 2 vans. Our student manager was driving one van, Janet Sullivan, and then Diane was driving the other van, and we're going on a big road trip to University of Wisconsin Green Bay. And they were as good then as they are now. And we get about, I think, about a half an hour, and for whatever reason, we're sort of heading up through the neighborhoods, like whatever, I'm forgetting all the road names, 55th or whatever, but we break down about a half an hour away. And we leave at night because we're going up there to practice for the first time at a gym in the morning. So this is all a big deal, but we leave at night and we break down. The car is completely dead, one of the vans. We are in, I don't even know if we knew where we were, at about 9 o'clock at night, pitch black, not the greatest neighborhood. And we have, you know, there's no cell phones at this time, there was no pay phones anywhere, and so Diane completely, it was amazing, just immediately showed her leadership. No panic at all. She just gets a little battle plan strategy, says that we're gonna all like go in this one van together to huddle for safety, and she's gonna leave us to find a garage somewhere to come back and take care of our van. And we made it very difficult for her because we were like, no, don't leave us, I can't live without you, let us go with you. And it was hysterical. I think we're trying to be funny, but then after she was gone for about an hour and a half. And we're sitting in this van, you know, like, hope we don't lose our tires at some point. And somehow she got back and got a hold of Miss Mulvaney, I'm pretty sure somehow, who ended up, because we didn't, I don't think, have credit cards at that time. You were carrying money to pay for everything.
I wasn't even 25. I already couldn't qualify for a credit card. I don't know why you hired me.
I knew a good thing.
You did know a good thing, and that was kind of cool because you basically just saw how incredibly cool she was under a lot of pressure and a very weird, bizarre situation. But that was bizarrely enough my favorite travel story.
That's also the transition to sports-specific coaches, because Pat Kirby was my coach for all 3 sports, for all 4 years.
It's true. Yeah, and someone gave
So
her
you
sort
knew
of basketball expertise.
And she did a really, really amazing job, and she was fighting every step of the way with Mary Jean. I'm sure there were many times when she was probably badgering you for more funds or uniforms or, you know, whatever it was, but she was a really great component. And you guys know her from the Kirby game, right? I don't know if anybody's...
Is anybody there at the Kirby game? You still doing the Kirby game? Yeah. Yeah. T-shirts, yeah. Well, that's memorializing and incredible.
Well, I'm going
advocate for
to
women.
tell a story about Rose. Well, first of all,
You don't need to.
Coach Kirby had no sense of direction.
Oh, you cannot beat her up when she's up here.
Well, she did. And one time, we were to go to what, I don't know what the name of the school is now. It used to be Rosaries in Dominican. So I was driving the other van. We went off to Rosary, and she wasn't there. I was surprised she wasn't there, and so we waited. And she had all the equipment. Of course, the stars took all the equipment so that they could do it. So anyway, we waited, and we waited, and finally I said, "Would you just loan us a ball?" We had nothing, and we were just standing around. And so finally, they gave us a ball. So the 6 or 8 were playing with this one ball.
So you had all the freshmen and the subs, right?
Yes.
Right.
That's what they
Yeah. So that's the way it worked. And so finally, in they came trooping, and I said, "Whatever on earth have you been?" Well, we went to Mundelein instead of Jerusalem. And I was so upset. So then it was shortly after that, we took off for a Burger King. I want you to know that we ate at Burger King and McDonald's, and when we finally had a budget where we could eat at a decent place, I have never been in a McDonald's. I'm serious, I have never been in one since. I don't even know what they look like. I don't care, I got so sick of them. she had all the money. So I would. So Rosie had fallen in the snow and had a scrape on her leg. So they came in and they said, well, what would you expect? You ran over Rosie. I said, I ran over Rosie. I didn't touch Rosie. What are you talking about? They went the wrong direction as usual. They went that way. And that was the way they were covering it.
They were coming up that I'd been run over by her. I actually looked like I'd been run over. So it was a hard fall. So, well, I want to thank the panel. I know that people have got things that they need to do, so I want to thank the panel for doing this. And does anyone have any questions or before we close here? So appreciate you guys coming out.
Yes.
Yeah, Erin?
Just quick on the faculty members or staff members attending games, because I think that is something that is really important for the students. And in my experience, it's been more successful if the students actually approach people they know and make them aware, because especially with the way this university is currently, there's a lot of things going on, there's a lot of distraction, and so I think it's a lot of our responsibility to put that out there. So just curious if you use that tactic, or was this mostly?
Yeah, well, I think Diane did a wonderful thing at Yale. I did use that tactic. Again, I had this little small department, this little German department, which was very close, but I think it was harder if you were in biology or one of the bigger departments to kind of make those connections. But Diane did a wonderful thing at Yale, is we had a guest coach program where the athletes would pick faculty and staff on the Yale's campus to personally invite to be a part of the bench, and then come in at halftime, listen to the halftime talk. And that was always interesting because Diane had some pretty good halftime talks. The hair definitely stood up a little bit, but they also sort of experienced how incredibly intense and important it was, and how, that it was a great thing for the university.
Right.
And I think at Yale in particular, that worked. And the faculty that came, some of them had never been to a sporting contest in their life. And they got such a kick out of it that they ended up, after being a guest coach, and they bragged about it on the campus, so I was a guest coach, and I went and I gave some comments at halftime, get them to beat Dartmouth. They ended up bringing more people with them, but I think that would be a great thing. And many of the faculty would probably love to be asked to do something like that. And it could work for every sport, I think, really. Yeah. But it does mean a lot, I think, if it comes from somebody who's been sitting in the classroom. Yeah.
And I do want to kind of acknowledge that we have some other alums in the class. Tracy, 85, Sue, 83, and Carol, 84. And then in the middle back, Lois Platt was the coach at Concordia College, who coached against us for years. We used to. It was a pretty good rivalry. We had a pretty good rivalry for a lot of years, for many years. And Janet always.
And Kid Van
And Kid Van for softball coach?
Softball.
Yeah, we're covered with softball coaches here, so, right?
Love's right here. They look so young compared to us.
Sorry, Kim?
I was wondering if you could get the current athletes, a photo of the current athletes in the panel.
Yeah.
And Erin, you in there too.
Yeah, come on up. Everyone on up.
Everybody's always getting photos.
Do that.
Julie, we love you. It's okay. Poor Julie.